we're on the record now, and go to, I think it's already sharing. Okay. All right. Oh, it says you can call in from your phone too to these. Isn't that crazy?
Listen in.
Wow, why would you want to do? Why would you ruin your life like that? No, I'm just kidding. All right. The recording is started, I think, on the record here. Everything's good. Okay. Let me close the door here. Like I said, I don't want people want business. Yesterday I got a little bit of bad news. They think that I tore my meniscus.
Oh, no.
So if you see me walking with a limp, right, I didn't kick my kid, right? So hard that that I'm having trouble walking. It's not anything like that. It's merely that they think I tore it, but they won't know for 4 weeks. So until the swelling goes down. So. Huh?
Did you go to the doctor?
Yeah. So it's okay. They give you all the good stuff, right, to send you home with. But my portfolio is due by today, right, to the dean. So I got to finish that today. So so we'll try to get that in and have that all finished. So I'm a little bit behind on emails. I know I got yours just because I saw yours and I was like, hey, I can fix this without sending an email, but I'm a little bit behind on emails. I'm not too far. I mean, just from Monday, but I'll get to them as soon as I finish all my stuff for today. So it is what it is there. Okay, let me just go ahead and bring it up here. Everybody can see me, hopefully, or hopefully not. Whatever your thing is. Okay. All right, so we're going to start on China. Look, I don't really want to talk about Imperial China too long. Okay. And one of the reasons is because it's not that important for what we're going to do later. Some very broad sort of strokes of cultural things we probably want to get at, right? But for the most part, we're not sitting there and going, oh, every little thing here is going to be super important. We want to be able to give you a background on why it is kind of important, right? Or just a little bit of an understanding, okay? Not to have some sort of a historical knowledge of Imperial China. If you want to do that, Dr. Spickerman's class is wonderful, right? He can tell you everything that's ever happened in China, right? And tell you everything. That's not what we're too interested in here, okay? But there we go. All right, the imperial rule of China often receives much of the credit and shoulders most of the blame in explaining the positives and negatives of contemporary problems in post-war China, okay? When we talk about post-war, we're talking about World War II, okay? And part of this is because there's two things we should talk about a little bit in terms of Chinese politics and the study of it from a political science point of view, is that, look, most of it's going to focus on that cultural, historical type of thing because it's hard to get data afterwards and it's hard to get data before in order to do our real sort of hard quantitative sort of analysis that y'all get in 3301, 3302, right? It's hard to do things like that because it's hard to trust the data that comes out of China. So it seems that more and more of that sort of understanding of it from a political science point of view comes from the historical cultural point of view. And so a lot of times they often go back to Imperial China, right? Because it is the antecedent, right? It is that thing that happened a long, long time ago, okay?
Because they don't have any information.
It's not that they don't have any information. It's that it's a little bit skeptical. Think about it this way. It's an authoritarian regime. It's more open than what we would say North Korea or the Islamic Republic or something like that, right? but you still shouldn't trust it all the way, right? I mean, for example, in DPRK, famously, the old ruler had a press release that said that he went golfing for the first time and got 18 holes in one. Right? On every single shot, got it on the first time, right? Come on, right? We were born in the dark, but it wasn't last night, right? And so that sometimes shapes the way we understand this, and also shapes the way we put a lot of emphasis on Imperial China, okay? On the one hand, it did have a government utilizing a semi-professional bureaucracy, okay? Semi-professional, meaning, we're going to go through it in a little bit, but they had the ability to tax. They had the ability to administer things. They had the ability to make laws, punish those sort of basic structures of society, okay? They could do these very functional things. Going back all the way until about 300 to 400 AD, they could do all these things, okay? And so it's a little bit different. All right. The Imperial Chinese system was not so rigid in terms of how operations took place, but the guiding philosophy of the government was called Confucianism, okay? Confucianism. Now, Confucianism is very controversial from an academic point of view, because he said a lot of different things, right? It's kind of like whenever we talk about, oh, the founding fathers wanted this. Well, they all had different opinions about everything, right? That's why they argued all the time, right? The same thing with Confucius. Some things are very clear and some things are not, okay? It often included the idea of a selfless and benevolent leader who wields power not for themselves, but as someone who sacrifices himself for the collective, okay? Now, if you can't get more pie in the sky than that, right? We're gonna all ride unicorns to work every day too, okay? It's just not very realistic, but it came from that idea, okay? Think of it in the same way as sort of our divine right monarchs of the 17th, 18th century in Europe, right? Do we really believe that God said, you are to rule everything, right? Probably not, okay? And so it's a similar sort of thing in that, yes, it seems a little over the top, right? But it's also kind of the governing structure in the way that it kind of worked, right? There weren't that many questions being asked about these leaders. They weren't going, oh, this is totally wrong, or this is totally right. They just said, hey, I'm a poor serf, right? I care about what the emperor's doing, okay? Does that make sense? All right. The leadership was to be coupled with a bureaucracy or a civil service selected and promoted based on merit, not political or familial favors, okay? Now, this did happen in China to some extent, okay? Now, it wasn't perfect. Of course, you're never going to get rid of nepotism and these type of things in any sort of a political institution, especially one that can tax, right?
Or someone buying their position.
Or someone buying a position or anything like that. And
they did a lot.
Yeah, and what happened was they would take over things, and then they'd have enough money to go get educated to get promoted. But is that buying it's one of those where
they had enough land and enough money where they had enough say.
Yeah.
No pay, no say.
The idea that you could take over land and build enough money to go to school in order so you could become a part of it or are they buying it, is a distinction without a difference. Right, it's not that different. But this is sort of the structure of it, okay? The final part and the most important part, right, is a citizenry that is largely compliant and submissive with the fact that the leadership will largely sacrifice for the populace and that the meritocracy and the civil service will hold corruption and inequality in check, okay? the part of these societies that you'll see, and next spring when we do Japan, you'll figure it out the same way as in the old days. That's the way that it was. This sort of submissive populace, right? They're not going to go out there. They're not going to go and protest. There's very few protests. You look at.
No, tell me if it goes.
What do you mean?
I mean, you're talking about our average.
An average Chinese person in 1600 is not protesting.
No doubt, they're gonna die.
Yeah, or, but even today,
Well, they're gonna.
not nearly as much as you would see out in the West, right? I mean, anything goes wrong in the West, everybody's out there protesting, right? There is either with a flag, or, a big sign that says, whatever, right? We gotta get rid of McMichael, right? McMichael's a tyrant, right? Get rid of him, okay? But in the same way, you don't see him nearly as much. And so that is a part of this. And so that was the idea behind it. How it really worked like this, who knows, okay? This method of governance also extended into the realm of foreign relations. Those nations wanting to trade with China often had to show fealty and shows of fealty to maintain positive relations, okay? They had to show that little submissive kind of part of it too, right? They weren't able to just go until much later, hey, China, open up, right? What they basically did is they would go there and they would be a part of the court. They would have to learn the customs, right, in order to be able to trade. And that all basically continues until we'll get to the Opium Wars, right? And that's where things basically change because we have to have our drugs in the West, right? That's where it really, really changes in the early 19th century. So, yeah. All right. Any questions about that? No? Anyone from online have any questions about that? Since I can go ahead and say it, I don't think so. No. I think it's just Audrey and I said, all right. Okay. Okay. Great. However, it is important to note that Confucianism as a governing philosophy wasn't universal through China, okay? It wasn't. Remember what we kind of talked about last time is that the geographical diversity of China is crazy, right? All the way in the West, okay? Going near Islamic societies, okay? All the way until it brushes up against Russia, basically, okay? All the way in the south to the Korean Peninsula, okay? That's a long way. And so imagine trying to have a centralized government over that amount of space. It's very, very difficult. Just think about how hard it is just in the United States, okay? We have high levels of technology, right? We have governments at almost every little individual level, okay? But people in South Texas could just get away with anything if they really wanted to, right? There's some rural areas out here. If you go toward past Seminole, right? That's basically your own land. No one's gonna go over there. If you really wanted to set up your own country or something, right? You can. In fact, there's people that have been trying, right? They're like, oh, we're gonna go buy this land. We're gonna set up I think it's called the Texas Free State, right? Right? Not for me, but whatever, right?
Mormons do it all the time.
Oh, that's true too. LDS do all the time, right? They set up different areas where.
Masses.
Yes.
I think they're buying thousands of acres here in Texas, and I think they're fixing to put one of their little compounds here in Texas.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. But you can do that, right? Because the area is so big. Same thing in China, right? There's tons of area. It's hard to govern. All right. Even if local tradition customs didn't permeate. For example, Tibet, with its strong and unyielding attachment to Buddhism, meant that central government could project its governing philosophy at the expense of Buddhist law, traditions, and customs. It had a hard time doing it, right? It literally does to this day, right? There's protests all the time, right? The Dalai Lama, right? Always criticizing the Communist Party, okay? They still can't keep Tibet really in line, okay? Can't keep Hong Kong in line. Can't keep Taiwan in line, okay? And that's with a sort of command economy, communist, one-party sort of dictatorship, right? So just imagine back then, where there's no technology, there's no way to actually administer it. It became very, very difficult, even if they wanted to, okay?
That Confucianism and Buddhism compete there in China?
Yeah, they certainly did, along with a couple other religions too. There's also Taoism and things like that in that area too. They definitely competed in.
It's just hard to take one particular system and make it work
For the whole place. Yeah.
From a guy that is in religion, I mean, it's very difficult.
It would be difficult for.
It's the same way that the Baptists, they call Texas the Bible Belt.
Right.
Well, you go to New York, there's very rarely do you see a Baptist church.
Right, and there's Presbyterian churches everywhere.
So what that tells you is it can't travel. I mean,
It's hard to travel. It's hard to centralize power on that way. And some of it was a clash of ideologies, but you know, if you go through Buddhism and you go through Taoism and a couple of the others, you'll see that there's some common threads, right, between all of them anyways. So sometimes it wasn't so much this big sort of crashing of ideologies, it was just geography and different customs, right, more than anything else. So yeah.
Sure, and they didn't follow Buddhism or Confucianism.
No,
If you read Confucianism and Buddhism, and then you see the actions of the leaders.
Yeah,
well,
especially.
They were not selfless.
Yeah, they were not selfless. That is definitely true. All right. Even with the focus, okay, even with that focus on Confucianism, the imperial government required quite a bit of pragmatism. Okay, they couldn't just go, oh, we're going to Confucius it up all day, every day. No, okay? Your book lists this as quote unquote legalism. Okay? I know we went through it, or we saw a little bit of it, okay? Those of you who've been in my class before, it should have looked like rational choice theory all over, and it is, okay? It defines it as a set of laws enacting to incentivize some behavior while disincentivizing others through rewards and or punishments. This is going to be extremely important for us, okay? Extremely. And the reason is, we'll cover it here in a second, okay? It required that both citizens and rulers in Imperial China adhere to rational choice theory from the formal political science and behavioral economics literature, okay? It's very, very similar. Those of you who haven't been here, you're ready for a little bit of a crash course of behavioral economics, okay? All right. I love this stuff. All right. Rational choice theory finds that we can make predictions and then test them empirically based on several assumptions about individual actors' actions, okay? First, individuals all hold a set of preferences regarding almost any set of alternative options. Okay. I like vanilla ice cream, right? My wife, chocolate, right? My kid, I don't care, I'm not buying them ice cream. No, I'm just kidding, right? Maybe the swirl, right? We all have preferences, okay? I prefer that the door's closed, right? Some people may not prefer it. Secondly, individuals can order those preferences between what they most prefer as opposed to those that they least prefer, okay? I prefer more money to less money, generally in my life, right? I don't know if you'll feel the same way, right? More money's better. I was once told that. Michael, more money's better than less money. Not always, I guess. I guess there's some situations where it's not. Okay. And we can order those, okay? The other thing is, those preferences are transitive, okay? Transitive. It's a really fancy academic word for if you prefer A to B and B to C, you also prefer A to C, right? If 3 is better than 2 and 2 is better than 1, 3 is also better than 1. Okay. Third, obtaining the most preferred allows individuals to maximize expected utility from choice, and individuals create strategy sets that maximize expected utility. Okay. All this says is, as human beings, we devise strategies to increase what we prefer, right? And decrease what we don't like, right? We want more of what we do like and less of what we don't like, okay? If the Chinese government under imperial times was making a set of laws to incentivize, that is to create a set of preferences for their individuals, right? We know that individuals then are going to try to follow those laws because of the incentives they provide, okay? They increase expected utility. Now, that's a very mathematical way to think about law, right? But it's true. We don't want to be punished and we would rather be rewarded, right? Once you figure that out, you can see that institutions, especially political institutions, the way they're set up, are devised in order to create certain political outcomes, right? That's no different than the United States Congress. This is why it's so important to us, okay?
They give Idaho certain preferences, so they will do their potatoes a certain way, or they take farmers and they make them, they give them incentives to not do their crop one year or do their crop one year. So it is along the same.
Yeah, but we can build predictions of what actors and what people will do across cultures, right? With this, right? That's the important part of it, okay? Okay, one of the most obvious ones. Everyone complains about, what does everyone complain about? Everyone complains about the amount of money that are spent in campaigns, right? Especially congressional campaigns, right? But one of the things that causes it is they are always up for re-election every 2 years, right? Do we want to ban elections? No, right?
Well, every 6 years.
But even that causes more, right? Because it makes the seat more valuable, right? And so what happens is that the rules that we set up to incentivize acting good sometimes have other outcomes, and we can predict what those outcomes are going to be, okay? We can do that in China, we can do that in Japan, we can do that in the US, we can do that in Europe. So that's why whenever I talk sometimes about culture not being this all-important thing that determines everything, right? It's not as ironclad as you'd think, okay? We can compare the United States and whatever other sort of nation. They do have similar outcomes, okay? But more importantly, the culture is sometimes built into our preferences, right? And so that's what we're really doing here. And that's why it was so important when I read that legalism part of there, right? It's a kind of a way to kind of talk about culture, and they did do some pragmatic things. But what it says is that they had similar preferences to societies that were even, this is what, 400 AD, okay? I mean, even during Roman times, right? Talk out bad, get the crucifixion, right? Not good, right? Maybe we shouldn't do that, right? And so they were doing the same similar things, right? It's not that different. Okay. All right, everyone okay with that? This will also help us cut across some of this, oh, well, I don't really understand China, right? It's a weird place, right? There's always, you know, the weird costumes, right? Or the weird things, or for example, in Chinese, the hundreds, if not thousands of homophones, all dictated differently in the way of speaking by intonation, right? To give you the actual meaning, right? In Japanese, it's done by context, right? You have to figure out from the context, okay? And you go, whoa, they have these weird little things out there, right? The whaling in Japan, right? cooking bats in China. That didn't go so well, did it? Right? Maybe we should close down the bat soup stores in China. All right, next time won't go so bad. But it helps us cut through these things, right? Because we can see there's an institution, it provides a rational incentive, and an individual probably follows it. Okay, makes sense? All right. Economics and societal relations in China. Okay, life in Imperial China largely focused on agrarian society with societal relations stemming from hierarchical relationships. Okay, hierarchical. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Looks like a pyramid, right? Okay. Individuals largely made their living by producing agrarian surpluses, but oftentimes local members of the bureaucracy would tax peasant farmers so that social mobility never really came into reach. Okay? That's not dissimilar from other sort of feudalism sort of societies that had these. They were just meant to set up to keep people down for the most part, keep the economy going through food, right? Without too much more, okay? All right. And by the way, this is something Mao's gonna hit on, right? When he starts in 47, right? When he starts trying to mobilize a thing for the great communist revolution, right? You could never get ahead before, right? We're offering farmers the way to get ahead, okay? And it's a strong message out in the countryside.
They're in, in China.
Yeah, in China, yeah. Eventually, it's gonna come out, look how long you've been repressed out here. How long have you been out in these fields, right? Now, didn't go so well, right? But that message was very powerful. Okay, way more powerful than the West thought it would be. Okay, all right. All right. Let me just put it right now. Life for women in Imperial China was terrible. Okay. Every once in a while, you go, man. Sometimes there's inequality in the U.S. It's not like this. Okay, not like in Imperial China.
Hey, all the way across the border.
It was bad.
Man, I'm gonna tell you guys, if you think that racism, systemic racism and all this crud is bad here, I promise you, you go take some trips, buddy. We have a great country in that area.
All right, younger Chinese women were married off to households at a relatively early age. Okay, that's not dissimilar from Western Europe, right? During feudalism, that's not that dissimilar. Okay, that happened pretty regularly, but found themselves under the thumb of their mother-in-law with little or no political, social, or economic rights, like none. Okay, and the mother-in-law ran the house; she was in charge. The young wife that came into this household was basically a slave for the mother-in-law. Okay, and that just does not sound very good, right? And it was terrible. And your book talks about the thing where they would tie the women's feet together for years and years and years because it was a sign that they were hip and into it, those sort of things. But it stunted bone growth, right? Caused injuries, all of these other things. Not too dissimilar than the Western, where they would bind them with the corset to make them like super skinny, right? Like super, super tight and they couldn't breathe and things like that. A similar thing, but for your feet, right? And so things were not great, but there we go. And we're gonna say this, and it might be a little bit out there, things didn't get much better under the CCP either, right? And we didn't talk about it in this section because it's a little bit out there, but it's not out there, but it's a little bit, it's just one of those things you don't want to talk about. Infanticide was a huge issue, okay? And that's the murder of your child as soon as they're born, because of their gender or whatever, right? You can't feed them or gender. That happened way more than people like to talk about. So that's a huge issue as well, okay? And so infanticide, one child, things like that that'll come during the Communist Party, it's a throwback to these sort of things, right? Of severe repression and women's rights not being very, not taken seriously. Okay?
They've always tried to control population.
Sure, I mean, of course, you know,
They're continuing to take.
yeah, well, I mean, that's definitely true.
Yeah.
It's just not a positive experience, and I'm not saying that it hasn't been any better, but that it's not getting a lot better, right? So let's put it this way: the rights of a Japanese woman in Japan are a hell of a lot better than they are of a Chinese woman, right? With democracy, you know, they can go protesting, run for office, all these other things, whereas the other might not be very true in China. All right. Imperial China began to flounder and collapse in the 1890s, leading to the complete collapse by 1912. One of the issues was, again, it was so big. It had 4 rebellions that would take the lives of roughly about 100 million Chinese people. Taiping, Niang, the Southwest Muslim Rebellion, and the Northwest Muslim Rebellion. Okay, when we think of Northwest, right? Here, Northwest is over here. It's a long way away. Southwest, right? Down here, okay? It's a long way away, okay? We don't need to know the dates or anything like that, but just that the imperial collapse was caused by a lot of things, but also some internal sort of security issues, okay? No, just that it was it's an extreme thing, right? You know, that a lot of them, okay? All right. Also, trade competition, okay? I think it's fair to say that China especially did terrible when it went to dealing with the challenges of the West and new trade disputes and things of that nature, okay? Part of the response to the Imperial Chinese government sought to prevent Western countries from using Chinese markets and resources to further their trade, okay? Historically, this is seen in the Opium Wars, where the British Empire won a considerable concession from the Imperial Chinese government, okay? It needed to improve its technology and weaponry to deal with the Western challenge, but it didn't do it almost at all. And what ended up happening was a lot of the Chinese military was going up against a very professionalized British military, right, of the empire, with little more than what would have been fought during, you know, the American Revolution. You know, muskets, arrows, sabotage, hatchets, knives, things like that, against the fully professionalized British military. Okay, and that's going to always end up bad for you. What happened is that when Britain goes in there and they really demolish the Chinese military, it puts the rest of East Asia, aka Japan, on notice. This is a weak country and you can go and take advantage of them, okay? And in true Japanese spirit, they did, okay? They developed very quickly. They had modern weapons. I know we hate it because it's a movie about a last samurai being white, right? But remember all that militarization you saw, right? And they had all these things, and they had these American Civil War generals and things like that going to Japan. Well, China didn't do any of that. So when it gets to 1894, 1895, Japan's already developed. It's already done all of its developing. It's ready to go. It's a world player. The rest of the world doesn't know it is yet, okay? But it is ready to take on the West as early as 1890, 1891. And China wasn't even developed at that point, okay? And you go, oh, well, how do we know they were developed? Because in 1903, 1904, the Japanese military goes and humiliates Russia, right? They were fully developed and capable by that time. And China just was not ready for it. They didn't develop, they didn't really know what they wanted to do. They didn't have a great plan of action. And so they faced not only the Western imperialism, but also Japanese imperialism. Okay. All right. They basically had three different approaches for the most part for the challenge of the West. There's three different theories in China about how to do it. Nativism argued that the best way to deal with these pressures involved becoming more isolationist and finding a uniquely, quote unquote, as your book, Chinese solution to the problem, right? I don't actually know what that means, right? What's the Chinese solution, right? The solution is the solution. It doesn't have to, you know. So, as you can probably tell, that wasn't going to work out very well, okay? Selective modernization meant taking the Chinese form of learning as the base of knowledge and concept, but using Western learning for practical usage. Okay. You might go, selective modernization, what does this really mean? Okay. The Islamic Republic is like this in selective modernization, right? They actually use modern, even though it wants to focus on religious doctrine that's much older, right? But they use science and technology from current day to do things like build weapons, right? You know, in 600, they didn't have nuclear weapons programs, right? But they fully try to develop them, right? And so they're using selective modernization, right? Keeping some of these concepts from what's important to them, but then using Western technology and ideas in order to modernize for strategic uses, okay? All right.
They didn't expect, China didn't expect, China was an isolationist country, so they didn't expect that they were ever going to have to trade. They would not accept that. Am I not correct by that? They would not.
I would say that
They didn't embrace it, therefore they lost
Yeah.
out on a lot of.
my only.
Japan shouldn't have beat them. They should-
No, and Japan was more isolationist because it's an island, right? It's out in the middle of nowhere, you know, it's.
But Japan opened up enough to make sure that
Yeah,
their
but-
technology and their.
But it was basically, they were tired of getting humiliated by the American military, right?
Yeah.
They were tired of
I
having to
get it.
open up.
Here.
My only thing on China is that they shared borders with other countries, so they should have been a little bit smarter about it. You know what I mean? When you share borders with a whole bunch of countries, it makes it a little bit less defensible. Sometimes with Japan, you kind of go, oh, well, of course, they're an island. They don't no one borders them, right? But yeah. And finally, a kind of classic modernization implied that China must become a society that itself can produce these technological innovations, but that the principles should be willing to do anything to develop a technologically vibrant society, including disregarding the older tenets of Confucianism, tradition, values, and norms. Okay? That iconic classic modernization was Japan, right? 100%. They said, get rid of the samurai tomorrow, right? And they did. Right? They said, you are no longer a samurai. Here's a knife. I'm going to cut the knot out. Those you don't know, they all had to have the knot. Right? Cut the knot out. You work like normal people now. We got to do this to develop. Okay?
And didn't they have a revolt?
Yes, they did have a revolt, but it didn't last very long because they had all the especially the Meiji regime had.
Did they ask British to help them with that?
They had British, American, and German. They called everybody. They basically called anybody that would answer, right? And said, hey.
I don't know if it's a true, is it based on a true story? Remember Tom Cruise?
Yeah, parts of it are so crazily bad.
I heard that from another colleague.
It's so crazily bad that at the end, Tom Cruise can have a talk with the Meiji Emperor. Literally, no one talked to him. Literally, no one. Okay? Even his counselors couldn't understand him sometimes because he spoke older Japanese. The idea that one winter in the snow, Tom Cruise in 1870 picked up enough Japanese, formal old school Japanese, to go talk to the emperor is just completely ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. So, yeah, I mean, most Japanese probably couldn't have talked with the emperor. Famously, of course, it's a Japan thing, but if you've ever heard of it, there's actually the phonograph of Hirohito surrendering, okay, and him actually talking about the surrender. Literally, they had to have someone to come and translate it on the radio because no one knew what he was talking about, right? So the idea that Tom Cruise is just going to roll up his short 8-week course right in the mountains, right, in Japanese with Ken Watanabe, right? Now he's got it all down. That's crazy.
He was there 6 months.
6 months. Oh, wow. Pick up formal Japanese in 6 months.
Yeah,
Great job.
That's one of the,
All right. I think that's it, isn't it? Yeah. Everyone okay? If you're not, I don't care. No, I'm just kidding. Right? It'll be okay. Am I missing anything? No? Then I guess we'll see you back on Tuesday. Tuesday. Okay, I'm gonna stop recording then, so that way, shut everything down. Stop it.